Lawrence James's hand freezes on the door panel as he realizes his grave error. The human diplomat stands rooted in shock, staring at the spectacle before him in the Iconian ambassador's private quarters. Flora, the Iconian diplomat, writhes in the center of the room. Her bioluminescent scales flicker rapidly through a kaleidoscope of colors: emerald green, sapphire blue, amethyst purple. Layers of translucent skin peel away from her body, revealing new, glistening scales underneath. The air is thick with a sweet alien musk. Lawrence's mind races. He's interrupted something deeply private, deeply forbidden. The trade negotiations, Earth's economic future, it all hangs in the balance of this moment. Intruder! A guttural cry erupts from one of Flora's bodyguards. The hulking Iconian moves with surprising speed, positioning itself between Lawrence and the molting ambassador. Its scales pulse in aggressive crimson. Lawrence raises his hands, backing away. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." His words are cut short as another guard seizes him, dragging him forcefully from the room. Lawrence catches one last glimpse of Flora. Despite the chaos, he's struck by her alien beauty, the way her new scales shimmer like polished opals in the dim light. The door slams shut. Alarms blare throughout the Iconian embassy. Lawrence finds himself surrounded by a phalanx of angry Iconian security personnel, their scales a uniform shade of threatening orange. "What have you done, human?" The lead guard's voice is a low hiss. "You've violated our most sacred taboo?" Lawrence's stomach drops. He's heard rumors about the Iconians' obsession with privacy, especially regarding bodily functions, but he never imagined it ran this deep. "It was an accident," he pleads. "I had no idea." The guard cuts him off with a sharp gesture. "Your ignorance is no excuse. The ambassador will demand satisfaction for this insult. The trade negotiations are over." Lawrence's mind reels. Earth desperately needs this trade deal with the Iconians. Without it, the planet's economy could collapse within months. He's just single-handedly jeopardized humanity's future with a simple mistake. As security escorts him from the embassy, Lawrence knows his career in diplomacy is likely over. But more than that, he's haunted by the image of Flora in her vulnerable state. Despite the dire circumstances, he finds himself drawn to her, fascinated by the glimpse of Iconian intimacy he witnessed. He realizes with a sinking feeling that he'll have to face Flora again. He'll need to apologize to try and salvage this disaster somehow. But how can he approach her after such a profound cultural transgression? And how can he focus on diplomacy when he can't shake the memory of her mesmerizing, iridescent scales? Lawrence takes a deep breath as he's shoved into a waiting hovercar. One thing is certain. The fate of Earth now rests on his ability to navigate this delicate interspecies minefield. He only hopes he's up to the challenge. As the hovercar whisked Lawrence away from the Iconian embassy, his mind raced with the enormity of his mistake. The image of Flora's shimmering scales haunted him, a reminder of the cultural chasm he had unwittingly stumbled into. He knew he couldn't let this diplomatic disaster stand. Earth's future depended on his ability to make amends. In the days that followed, Lawrence threw himself into research with a fervor that surprised even his most dedicated colleagues. He practically lived in the embassy's archives, poring over every scrap of information about Iconian culture, biology, and social norms. The more he learned, the more he realized how little humans truly understood about their alien neighbors. On his fifth day of research, Lawrence stumbled upon a passage that made his heart race. It described an Iconian ritual called the luminous atonement, a sacred act of apology where the offending party exposed themselves in a vulnerable state to the offended. This, Lawrence thought, could be his chance to make things right. With trembling hands, he arranged a private meeting with Flora. As he stood outside her quarters, he took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. The door slid open, revealing Flora's imposing form. Her scales now shimmered a cautious blue-green. "Ambassador Flora," Lawrence began, his voice steadier than he felt. "I've come to perform the luminous atonement." Flora's eyes widened, her scales flickering with surprise. Before she could respond, Lawrence began to remove his jacket. "I understand now the gravity of my transgression," he continued, fumbling with his shirt buttons. "I'm here to make myself vulnerable, as your customs dictate." "Wait!" Flora's voice rang out, a mix of alarm and confusion. Her hand shot out, stopping Lawrence before he could remove any more clothing. "What are you doing?" Lawrence froze, his shirt half unbuttoned. "The luminous atonement," he explained, suddenly unsure. "I read about it in the archives. It's a ritual of vulnerability, isn't it?" A sound erupted from Flora that Lawrence couldn't immediately identify. It took him a moment to realize she was laughing. A deep, rumbling sound, unlike any human laughter he'd ever heard. "Oh, Lawrence," she said, her scales dancing with amusement. "The vulnerability in the luminous atonement is emotional, not physical. It's performed fully clothed." Heat rushed to Lawrence's face as he hurriedly rebuttoned his shirt. "I'm so sorry," he stammered. "I seem to have a talent for misunderstanding your customs." To his surprise, Flora's expression softened. "Your misunderstanding may be, but your intent is clear," she said. "Few humans have ever shown such dedication to understanding our ways. Please, come in. We have much to discuss." As Lawrence entered Flora's quarters, she began to explain the true nature of the molting process he had witnessed. "It's not just a physical transformation," she said, her voice taking on a vulnerable quality. "It's deeply emotional, often painful. During molting, we're at our most exposed, body and soul." Lawrence listened intently, his embarrassment fading as genuine fascination took hold. He found himself asking questions, not just about molting, but about Iconian life and culture. Flora, in turn, seemed eager to share, her initial anger replaced by an appreciation for Lawrence's sincere interest. As their conversation deepened, Lawrence felt a shift in the air between them. The cultural barrier that had seemed so insurmountable began to feel more like a bridge waiting to be built. Flora's scales took on a warm, inviting glow that Lawrence found mesmerizing. Their discussion was interrupted by a chime from Flora's communication device. She glanced at it, her scales flickering with concern. "News of your attempted luminous atonement has spread through the embassy," she explained. "It's causing quite a stir." Lawrence's stomach dropped. "I've made things worse, haven't I?" Flora's response surprised him. "Not necessarily. While some are offended by the misinterpretation, others are impressed by your willingness to embrace our customs. It sparked a debate about human Iconian relations." As if on cue, Lawrence's own communicator buzzed. It was a message from Ambassador Marcus Blackwood, his superior. The human diplomatic corps was in an uproar, divided over Lawrence's actions. Some praised his initiative, while others feared he had irrevocably damaged relations with the Iconians. Blackwood, however, saw an opportunity. He proposed a cultural exchange program between humans and Iconians, aimed at preventing future misunderstandings. It was a bold move, one that could either salvage the situation or backfire spectacularly. Lawrence looked up from his communicator to find Flora watching him intently. Her scales had taken on a thoughtful hue. "A cultural exchange program?" she mused. "It could work, but it would need careful planning." "Would you be willing to help design it?" Lawrence asked, hope rising in his chest. "Your insight would be invaluable." Flora's scales rippled with a color Lawrence hadn't seen before, a soft, warm glow that seemed to invite closeness. "I would be honored," she said. "Perhaps together we can turn this incident into something positive for both our species." As they began to discuss the potential program, Lawrence couldn't help but feel a growing attraction to Flora. Her intelligence, her willingness to move past his blunder, the way her scales danced with every emotion, it all captivated him in a way he'd never experienced before. He pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the task at hand. There would be time to explore these new emotions later. For now, they had a bridge to build between their worlds, and Lawrence was determined to see it through. As Lawrence and Flora delved into the intricacies of planning the cultural exchange program, their initial awkwardness melted away, replaced by a growing rapport. Days turned into weeks, and their meetings became a highlight for both of them. Lawrence found himself captivated by Flora's insights into Iconian society, while she showed genuine curiosity about human customs and traditions. One afternoon, as they pored over curriculum outlines in Flora's quarters, Lawrence noticed her scales taking on a deeper, more vibrant hue. He'd learned to read her colors better over time, and this particular shade indicated deep concentration and engagement. I never realized how complex human social structures could be, Flora mused, her eyes scanning a datapad. The concept of having multiple circles of friends with varying degrees of closeness is fascinating. Lawrence chuckled. It can be confusing, even for us sometimes, but I'm equally intrigued by Iconian communal living. The idea of shared consciousness during your hibernation cycles is mind-boggling. As Flora opened her mouth to respond, the lights in her quarters flickered and died. The gentle hum of the environmental controls fell silent, plunging them into an eerie quiet. That's strange, Lawrence muttered, reaching for his communicator. Before he could activate it, the temperature in the room began to rise rapidly. Sweat beaded on his forehead as the heat intensified. Flora's scales started to pulse erratically, shifting through a spectrum of colors Lawrence had never seen before. Her breathing became labored and she stumbled, catching herself on the edge of her desk. "Flora!" Lawrence moved to support her, alarm rising in his chest. "What's happening?" "The heat," she gasped, her voice strained. "It's triggering a molt, but it's too soon, too fast. I need to get to my molting chamber." Lawrence's mind raced, recalling his research on Iconian biology. An unscheduled molt could be life-threatening if not properly managed. Without hesitation, he wrapped an arm around Flora's waist, supporting her weight as he guided her towards a door he'd never noticed before. "How do I open it?" he asked urgently. Flora pressed her palm against a hidden panel, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. As they crossed the threshold, Lawrence's hand brushed against Flora's exposed scales. A wave of bioluminescence rippled across her body, accompanied by a sharp intake of breath from both of them. The contact sent a jolt through Lawrence, a mixture of awe and something deeper, more primal. He pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the task at hand. The molting chamber was unlike anything Lawrence had ever seen. Curved walls pulsed with a soft, organic light, and strange, root-like appendages hung from the ceiling. Flora directed him to a control panel near the entrance. "You'll need to activate the stabilization field," she instructed, her voice wavering. And then you should go. This isn't something outsiders are meant to witness." Lawrence's hand hovered over the controls. "Flora, I can't leave you like this. What if something goes wrong?" Her scales shimmered with a mix of fear and gratitude. "Lawrence, you don't understand. This process is intimate, personal. I understand more than you think," he said softly, "and I'm not going anywhere unless you absolutely want me to." Flora's eyes met his, and for a moment, the universe seemed to shrink to just the two of them. She nodded slowly. "Stay," she whispered. Lawrence activated the stabilization field, watching as a shimmering energy enveloped Flora. Following her instructions, he adjusted various controls, regulating temperature and humidity. All the while, he couldn't tear his eyes away from the transformation taking place before him. Flora's outer layer of scales began to lift and separate, revealing new, glistening skin underneath. The process looked painful, but also beautiful in its own alien way. Lawrence found himself mesmerized by the play of colors across her body, each wave of bioluminescence telling a story he was only beginning to understand. As the molt progressed, Flora's defenses lowered. She shared with Lawrence aspects of Iconian life he never could have learned from any book or cultural program. The emotional significance of each color change, the way their bodies reflected their innermost feelings during this vulnerable time. Hours passed, though it felt like both an eternity and a heartbeat to Lawrence. As Flora's new scales settled into place, a sense of calm descended over the chamber. She looked at him with new eyes, as if seeing him for the first time. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with a warmth that made Lawrence's heart race. "What you've done, what you've seen, it changes things between us." Lawrence nodded, understanding the weight of the moment. "I know, and I wouldn't change it for anything." As they prepared to leave the molting chamber, reality came crashing back. Lawrence's communicator buzzed incessantly with messages from Ambassador Blackwood. The power failure had raised alarms throughout the embassy, and suspicions of sabotage were running high. Flora and Lawrence exchanged a look, both realizing that their shared experience, beautiful as it was, could have far-reaching consequences for the negotiations and their respective careers. "We should keep this between us," Lawrence said reluctantly. "At least for now." Flora's scales rippled with agreement, but there was a sadness in her eyes. Yes, that would be wise. But Lawrence, what happened here? What we shared? It can't be undone. As they stepped out of the chamber, back into the politically charged atmosphere of the embassy, Lawrence knew she was right. Whatever came next, their relationship had fundamentally changed. The question was, would it bring their worlds closer together or drive them further apart? Apart. As they stepped out of the molting chamber, the weight of their shared experience hung between them, a delicate thread connecting two worlds. In the days that followed, Lawrence found himself drawn to Flora's quarters with increasing frequency. Their work on the cultural exchange program provided a convenient excuse, but both knew there was more to it than mere professional collaboration. One afternoon, as they pored over plans for a joint art exhibition, Lawrence's hand accidentally brushed against Flora's arm. A cascade of bioluminescence rippled across her scales, painting the room in a soft, warm glow. Their eyes met, and for a moment the universe seemed to hold its breath. Flora's scales shimmered with a mix of uncertainty and longing. "Lawrence," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "what's happening between us?" Before he could respond, a sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Ambassador Blackwood's voice came through the intercom, requesting Lawrence's presence immediately. As Lawrence hurried to the human section of the embassy, he failed to notice the watchful eyes of Captain Ethan Hayes following his movements. The security officer made a note in his datapad, his expression unreadable. In Blackwood's office, Lawrence found the ambassador pacing, his face creased with concern. "Lawrence, we've uncovered evidence of tampering with the embassy's environmental systems," Blackwood said without preamble. The power failure in the Iconian quarters wasn't an accident. Lawrence's mind raced, thinking back to Flora's unscheduled molt. "Do we know who's responsible?" Blackwood shook his head. "Not yet, but tensions are rising. Both sides are pointing fingers. I need you to keep your ear to the ground, especially among the Iconians. Your close working relationship with Flora could be valuable here." Lawrence nodded, trying to ignore the knot forming in his stomach. As he left the office, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking a tightrope between two worlds, with the abyss of interstellar conflict yawning beneath him. Over the next few weeks, Lawrence and Flora threw themselves into preparations for the art exhibition. They worked side by side, selecting pieces that showcased the best of both human and Iconian cultures. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities for closeness. One evening, as they arranged a delicate Iconian light sculpture, Lawrence reached out to steady it just as Flora did the same. Their hands met, and a brilliant burst of color exploded across Flora's skin. The sculpture amplified the light, casting shimmering patterns across the walls. "It's beautiful," Lawrence breathed, mesmerized by the interplay of light and color. Flora's scales pulsed with a deep, rich hue he'd never seen before. "It is," she agreed, but her eyes were fixed on him, not the sculpture. Unbeknownst to them, Zara, a conservative Iconian diplomat, had entered the room silently. Her eyes narrowed as she observed the intimate moment, her mind already formulating plans to put an end to this blossoming interspecies romance. The night of the exhibition arrived, bringing with it a palpable sense of anticipation. The embassy buzzed with activity as humans and Iconians mingled, admiring the artwork and engaging in cautious but friendly conversation. Lawrence and Flora moved through the crowd, their pride in their joint accomplishment evident in every gesture and smile. As they paused before a striking abstract painting, Flora leaned close to whisper an observation in Lawrence's ear. Her scales flickered with a soft, intimate light, a sight that did not go unnoticed by the ever-watchful Zara. As the evening wound down, Lawrence and Flora slipped away from the crowd, seeking a moment of privacy in the embassy gardens. The alien Flora cast strange, beautiful shadows in the starlight, creating an otherworldly atmosphere. "We did it," Lawrence said, his voice filled with wonder. "Look at them all in there, talking, laughing. This is what it's all about, isn't it? Building bridges between our worlds." Flora's scales rippled with joy, and something deeper, more intense. Yes, she agreed, moving closer. Bridges between worlds and between hearts. In that moment, surrounded by the beauty they had helped create, Lawrence and Flora's restraint finally broke. Their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and electric. Flora's entire body lit up with a dazzling display of bioluminescence, bathing them both in a warm, pulsing glow. Neither of them noticed the two figures watching from the shadows. Captain Hayes's hand went to his communicator, his duty warring with his sympathy for the star-crossed lovers. On the other side of the garden, Zara's eyes gleamed with triumph as she captured the scene with her datapad. As Lawrence and Flora broke apart, breathless and glowing, quite literally in Flora's case, they remained blissfully unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon. Their minds were filled with dreams of a future where their love could flourish openly, where humans and Iconians could live in harmony. "We should tell them," Lawrence said, his heart racing. "All of them. We could use our story to show that true understanding between our species is possible." Flora's scales shimmered with a mix of hope and trepidation. "It won't be easy," she cautioned. "There will be opposition on both sides." Lawrence took her hands in his, marveling at the play of light across her skin. "Then we'll face it together. We'll propose a more permanent cultural integration program. We can be living proof that it can work." As they made plans for their revelation, the seeds of conflict were already taking root. In the human quarter, Captain Hayes reluctantly made his report to Ambassador Blackwood. In the Iconian wing, Zara began compiling her dossier of evidence against the couple. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only Lawrence and Flora's love, but the very foundations of human-Iconian relations. As they walked back to the exhibition, hand in hand, they were stepping into a political minefield that threatened to tear apart everything they had worked so hard to build. The glow of their shared triumph, however, was short-lived. The next morning, Lawrence awoke to an urgent message on his communicator. Ambassador Blackwood's voice, terse and strained, demanded his immediate presence in the main conference room. A similar summons reached Flora in her quarters. As they made their way through the embassy's corridors, Lawrence and Flora exchanged worried glances. The air seemed thick with tension, and even the usually bustling halls were eerily quiet. They entered the conference room to find Ambassador Blackwood and High Counselor Zenari waiting for them. The atmosphere was glacial, a stark contrast to the warmth of the previous night's exhibition. "Sit down," Blackwood said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. As Lawrence and Flora took their seats, a holographic display flickered to life between them. Lawrence's heart sank as he recognized the image. Himself and Flora in the embassy gardens, locked in an intimate embrace. The bioluminescent glow of Flora's scales painted the scene in unmistakable detail. "Would either of you care to explain this?" High Counselor Zenari's voice was cold, her multifaceted eyes glittering with scarcely controlled fury. Before they could respond, Ambassador Blackwood spoke up. "Captain Hayes brought this to my attention last night. It seems your indiscretion was captured by our security systems." Flora's scales rippled with a mix of fear and defiance. "We've done nothing wrong," she began, but Zenari cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Nothing wrong," the Iconian leader hissed. "You've violated countless protocols, not to mention sacred Iconian traditions." She tapped a command into her datapad, and a series of images appeared, showing Flora's bioluminescent reactions to Lawrence's presence over the past weeks. Lawrence felt the blood drain from his face as he realized the extent of their surveillance. "How long have you been watching us?" he demanded. "Long enough," Blackwood replied, his expression grim. "Lawrence, I'm sorry, but I have no choice. You're being removed from the diplomatic team, effective immediately." The words hit Lawrence like a physical blow. He turned to Flora, seeking comfort, but found her scales had dulled to a sickly gray. High Counselor Zenari's voice cut through his shock. "As for you, Flora, you will return to the Iconian homeworld at once. You require immediate purification rituals to cleanse you of this human taint." Flora recoiled as if struck. "You can't do this," she protested, her voice rising. "We've done nothing but bring our people closer together." A commotion outside the conference room drew their attention. Through the windows, they could see crowds gathering in the embassy plaza. Angry voices filtered through the soundproofing, a mix of human and Iconian protesters. "I'm afraid the situation has escalated beyond our control," Blackwood said, gesturing to the scene outside. "News of your relationship has leaked. Both sides are calling for an immediate end to the trade negotiations." Lawrence stood, his fists clenched. "This is absurd. Our relationship is proof that humans and Iconians can coexist, even thrive together." "Enough!" Zanari snapped. "Guards, escort them to separate quarters. They are not to have any contact until further notice." As Iconian and human security personnel entered the room, Lawrence reached for Flora. Their fingers brushed, sending a final cascade of light across her scales before they were pulled apart. "This isn't over," Lawrence called as he was led away. "We'll find a way." Hours passed in isolation. Lawrence paced his quarters, his mind racing with possible solutions, each more desperate than the last. Outside, the protest grew louder, more volatile. A sharp knock at his door broke his reverie. To his surprise, it was Dr. Alara Voss, the embassy's xenobiologist. "We don't have much time," she said, slipping into the room. "I've been studying the data from your encounter with Flora. Lawrence, I think your relationship might be the key to something extraordinary." She quickly explained her theory about the biological compatibility between humans and Iconians, emphasizing the potential for groundbreaking research. "A faction of progressives in both delegations is pushing to continue your relationship under observation," Dr. Voss said, her eyes shining with excitement. "If we can prove a deeper connection is possible, it could change everything." Lawrence's heart raced with renewed hope. "What can I do?" "For now, cooperate with the investigation," Dr. Voss advised. "I'll work on convincing the scientific community of the importance of this discovery. There's an emergency summit being called to address the situation. If we can sway enough opinions before then, we might have a chance." As Dr. Voss left, Lawrence felt a glimmer of hope. He sat at his desk, determined to document every aspect of his relationship with Flora that might support Dr. Voss's theory. Somewhere in the embassy, Flora too sat in isolation, her scales pulsing with a tenacity that matched Lawrence's. Neither of them knew what the coming days would bring, but they were ready to fight for their love and the future of human-Iconian relations. Outside, the protest raged on, a stark reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. The fate of 2 individuals and 2 species hung in the balance, with the upcoming summit poised to shape the course of interstellar diplomacy for generations to come. "Come!" As Lawrence continued his furious scribbling, documenting every nuance of his relationship with Flora, a sharp knock at the door startled him from his concentration. "Mr. Reeves, you're to come with us immediately," a stern-faced security officer announced as the door slid open. Lawrence's heart raced as he was escorted through the embassy's corridors. The once familiar halls now felt alien and hostile, filled with whispers and sidelong glances. As they approached the shuttle bay, he caught sight of Flora across the hangar, surrounded by her own contingent of guards. Their eyes met briefly, a fleeting moment of connection amidst the chaos. Flora's scales flickered with a soft, mournful blue before she was ushered onto a waiting shuttle. "Where are we going?" Lawrence demanded as he was led to a separate craft. "Emergency summit," the officer replied curtly. "Neutral space station orbiting Earth. That's all I can say." The journey to the space station was a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Lawrence's mind raced with possibilities, hoping against hope that Dr. Voss's intervention might somehow salvage the situation. As they docked at the station, Lawrence was struck by the sheer scale of the gathering. Delegations from both human and Iconian worlds filled the corridors, their faces etched with concern and curiosity. The main conference chamber buzzed with tension as Lawrence was led inside. He scanned the room, taking in the familiar faces of Ambassador Blackwood and High Counselor Zanari, as well as a striking woman he recognized as President Eliza Frost, Earth's newly elected leader. Dr. Alara Voss stood at a podium, her voice clear and passionate as she presented her findings. "The bioluminescent reaction observed in Flora isn't just a curiosity," she explained, gesturing to a holographic display of cellular structures. It represents a fundamental compatibility between human and Iconian biology that could revolutionize interspecies medicine and communication. Lawrence watched as President Frost leaned forward, her interest piqued. And you believe further study of this couple could lead to these breakthroughs? She asked. Before Dr. Voss could respond, a harsh voice cut through the chamber. This is an abomination. Zara, the conservative Iconian diplomat, stood up abruptly. We cannot allow our sacred genetic heritage to be polluted by human influence. A murmur of agreement rippled through a section of the Iconian delegation, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I concur, a gravelly human voice added. Lawrence turned to see a silver-haired man with a hawkish face addressing the assembly. Senator Victor Hawthorne, Madam President, we must consider the implications for humanity. Are we prepared for the consequences of such intimate alien contact? The debate intensified, voices rising as arguments flew back and forth. Lawrence felt powerless, a mere spectator to the fate being decided for him and Flora. Suddenly, a commotion near the Iconian section drew everyone's attention. Flora, who had been sitting quietly, began to convulse, her scales rippling with chaotic patterns of light. She's entering a stress-induced molting cycle, an Iconian medic shouted, rushing to her side. Without thinking, Lawrence vaulted over the barrier, separating him from Flora. He pushed past the startled guards, ignoring their shouts as he reached for her trembling form. Flora, he said softly, taking her hand. I'm here. You're not alone. The effect was immediate and stunning. As Lawrence's fingers intertwined with hers, the erratic flashing of Flora's bioluminescence began to stabilize. The panicked writhing of her body eased, and her breathing steadied. The chamber fell silent as everyone watched in awe. Dr. Voss was the first to break the spell, her voice filled with awe-inspiring excitement. Do you see? Their connection goes beyond the emotional. There's a tangible physiological response. President Frost stood, her eyes sharp with interest. Dr. Voss, what exactly are you proposing? A controlled cohabitation experiment, Voss replied quickly. We can observe their interactions in a scientifically monitored environment. The potential for medical and diplomatic breakthroughs is enormous. High Counselor Zenari's multifaceted eyes narrowed. And what assurances can you offer for Flora's safety? For the integrity of Iconian culture? A flurry of negotiations followed, with President Frost skillfully mediating between the factions. Finally, a compromise was reached. The experiment would proceed under strict protocols, with joint human and Iconian oversight. As the summit adjourned, Lawrence and Flora were led to their new quarters on the space station. The room was a strange blend of sterility and comfort, every surface overflowing with sensors and monitoring equipment. The door slid shut behind them with a soft hiss, leaving them alone for the first time since their separation. Lawrence turned to Flora, taking in the shimmering patterns playing across her scales. So, he said, managing a wry smile, home sweet home? Flora's bioluminescence pulsed with a mix of trepidation and hope. For now, at least, she replied softly. Lawrence, what have we gotten ourselves into? Before he could answer, a small red light blinked on one of the many cameras surrounding them, a stark reminder of their new reality. Every word, every touch, every flicker of light across Flora's skin would be scrutinized and analyzed. Unbeknownst to the couple, several decks below, Zara huddled with a group of like-minded Iconians, their voices low and urgent as they plotted to derail the experiment. And in another corner of the station, Senator Hawthorne made a series of encrypted calls, setting his own plans in motion. As Lawrence and Flora began to explore their new living space, the weight of responsibility settled heavily upon them. The fate of two species now rested on their shoulders, and the true test of their bond was only just beginning. The true test of their bond was only just starting as they faced the reality of their new living situation. Lawrence took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. We'll make the best of this, he said, reaching out to gently touch Flora's arm. Her scales rippled with a soft, comforting glow at his touch. As days passed, the couple gradually adjusted to their new routine. Every morning, they woke to the quiet hum of machinery and the blinking lights of countless sensors. Dr. Voss's team monitored their every move, from their sleep patterns to their dietary habits. Initially, their interactions were stiff and self-conscious. Lawrence found himself hesitating before every gesture, hyper-aware of the cameras tracking his movements. Flora's bioluminescence flickered erratically, betraying her discomfort with the constant scrutiny. "I feel like a specimen in a zoo," Flora confided one evening, her scales dimming to a muted blue. Lawrence nodded, understanding her frustration. "I know, but remember why we're doing this. We're proving that our species can coexist, maybe even thrive together." As the days turned into weeks, they slowly became more at ease. Their natural chemistry began to resurface, shining through despite the artificial environment. Lawrence found comfort in the familiar patterns of Flora's bioluminescence, while she took solace in the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Dr. Voss and her team watched with growing excitement as new phenomena emerged. During a shared meal, Flora's scales suddenly erupted in a dazzling display of colors never before seen in Iconian biology. "Fascinating," Dr. Voss murmured, her eyes glued to the monitors. "The pigmentation patterns are completely novel. It's as if her bioluminescent capabilities are evolving in response to human presence." Equally intriguing were the changes observed in Lawrence. Regular medical scans revealed that his bone density remained stable, defying the usual deterioration experienced by humans in space. His muscle mass even showed a slight increase, puzzling the scientists. These developments did not go unnoticed by the leadership of both species. President Frost authorized additional funding for the experiment, eager to explore the potential benefits for human space exploration. High Counselor Zenara, while still cautious, acknowledged the possible medical applications for Iconians. However, not everyone shared this enthusiasm. Senator Hawthorne, true to his word, had begun implementing his plan to sabotage the experiment. Using his influence, he arranged for subtle alterations to the environmental controls in the couple's quarters. Gradually increase the oxygen levels and reduce the ambient temperature, he instructed a covert operative on the station. Make it more Earth-like. Let's see how the alien adapts to that. Simultaneously, Zara set her own plan in motion. Using her diplomatic status, she managed to have an Iconian artifact secretly placed in Lawrence and Flora's living space. The luminous chalice, a sacred object used in purification rituals, sat innocuously on a shelf, its true purpose known only to Zara. This will remind her of her true heritage, Zara thought, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. As these hidden manipulations took effect, Lawrence and Flora began to experience unexpected challenges. Flora found herself molting more frequently, her scales itching and uncomfortable in the gradually changing atmosphere. "I don't understand," she said, frustration evident in her voice as she scratched at her arm. "This isn't my normal cycle." Lawrence, meanwhile, found his attention increasingly drawn to the luminous chalice. He experienced vivid dreams filled with unfamiliar Iconian landscapes and rituals. "Flora," he asked one morning, his voice hesitant, "have you ever seen a city made entirely of living crystal?" Flora's bioluminescence pulsed with confusion. "No, but it sounds like Zalthor, an ancient Iconian holy site. How do you know about that?" Dr. Voss and her team struggled to make sense of these sudden changes. They ran additional tests, collected more data, but the results only raised more questions. The stability of the human-Iconian biological compatibility, which had seemed so promising, now appeared increasingly uncertain. Tension grew within the small living space. Flora's discomfort led to mood swings, her bioluminescence flaring unpredictably. Lawrence, grappling with the strange visions induced by the chalice, found himself torn between concern for Flora and an inexplicable longing for a world he'd never seen. Despite these challenges, their emotional bond deepened. They clung to each other for support, finding solace in their shared struggle against the mysterious forces affecting them. The situation reached a critical point during one of Flora's molting episodes. The altered environment had triggered a severe reaction, causing her entire body to convulse with chaotic patterns of light. "Flora!" Lawrence cried out, watching helplessly as she writhed in pain. Dr. Voss's voice came urgently through the room's speakers. "Mr. Reeves, please step back. We need to stabilize her condition." But Lawrence couldn't bring himself to leave her side. Acting on instinct, he entered Flora's molting chamber, ignoring the protests of the scientists. As he approached Flora, the luminous chalice began to glow with an intense, pulsating light. It created an unexpected resonance with Flora's bioluminescence, filling the room with a blinding radiance. The station's sensors overloaded, plunging the entire deck into darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but silence and the soft glow emanating from Flora's scales. When the power returned and the scientists could see into the chamber again, they gasped in amazement. Lawrence and Flora stood embracing, their bodies seemingly in perfect harmony. Flora's molting had stabilized, her scales gleaming with a healthy, vibrant light. Lawrence's vital signs, displayed on a nearby monitor, showed an unprecedented alignment with Iconian physiological patterns. Dr. Voss stared at the readings in disbelief. "This is incredible," she whispered. "We're witnessing something entirely new in the field of xenobiology." As news of this development spread, both human and Iconian societies erupted into heated debates. The implications of such a close interspecies bond were staggering, raising questions about the future of both races. In their living quarters, Lawrence and Flora held each other close, aware that they had become more than just subjects of an experiment. They were now symbols of a possible shared future, carrying the weight of two species' hopes and fears on their shoulders. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the space station, Senator Hawthorne and Zara regrouped. Their initial plans had backfired spectacularly, but they were far from giving up. "We need to take more drastic measures," Hawthorne growled, his face illuminated by the glow of a secure communication device. Zara nodded, her eyes cold with drive. "Agreed. This abomination cannot be allowed to continue." As they began to formulate their new strategy, the fate of Lawrence and Flora, and perhaps of human Iconian relations, hung in the balance. The next phase of their journey was about to begin, with challenges they could scarcely imagine lying ahead. As they began to formulate their new strategy, the fate of Lawrence and Flora, and perhaps of human Iconian relations, hung in the balance. The next phase of their journey was about to begin, with challenges they could scarcely imagine lying ahead. The aftermath of the intense bioluminescent event transformed the space station into a hive of activity. Dr. Ilara Voss and her team worked around the clock, analyzing the massive influx of data from the phenomenon. Meanwhile, Lawrence and Flora found themselves subjected to a battery of tests, their bodies probed and scanned by an array of sophisticated medical equipment. "I feel like a lab rat," Lawrence muttered as a technician attached another set of electrodes to his chest. Flora, lying on an adjacent examination table, flashed a pattern of sympathetic blue across her scales. "At least you're not molting," she quipped, her voice strained but attempting levity. The test revealed startling changes in both of their physiologies. Dr. Voss's eyes widened as she reviewed the results, her fingers flying across her datapad. "This is extraordinary," she breathed, turning to her colleagues. "Lawrence's DNA shows clear signs of incorporating Iconian genetic markers, and Flora's bioluminescent patterns have stabilized into a completely novel form." The news spread rapidly through both human and Iconian channels. President Eliza Frost, recognizing the potential impact of these findings, quickly mobilized resources. In a video conference with her advisors, she laid out her plans. "We need to expand this research program immediately," she declared, her voice firm. "I'm authorizing the construction of a larger, more advanced facility on Earth. We need to study more human Iconian pairs to understand the full scope of these changes." High Counselor Zenari, facing pressure from all sides of Iconian society, reluctantly agreed to send a delegation of volunteers to participate in the expanded program. The decision sparked heated debates in the Iconian council chambers. "You're betraying our species' purity," one elder shouted, his scales flashing angry red. Zenari's multifaceted eyes narrowed. "We must adapt or risk being left behind," he replied, his voice echoing through the chamber. As preparations for the new facility began, Lawrence and Flora found themselves thrust into the spotlight. Despite efforts to maintain their privacy, grainy images of the couple leaked to the press, igniting a media frenzy. Human tabloids plastered their photos across headlines, speculating wildly about their relationship. Iconian news sources debated the ethics of interspecies bonding, with conservative voices warning of cultural erosion. Senator Victor Hawthorne seized the opportunity to further his agenda. He stood before a crowd of supporters, his voice booming through loudspeakers. "We cannot allow alien influence to corrupt our very DNA," he thundered, eliciting cheers from the crowd. "The changes observed in Lawrence Reeves are just the beginning. We must protect our genetic purity." His words struck a chord with isolationist groups, sparking protests in major cities across Earth. Crowds gathered outside government buildings, waving signs with slogans like "Humans for Humans" and "No Alien DNA." Unaware of the growing unrest, Lawrence and Flora prepared for their transfer to the new Earth facility. As they packed their belongings, Lawrence's hand brushed against something smooth and cool. "Flora, look at this," he said, pulling out the luminous chalice from beneath a pile of clothes. The artifact pulsed with a soft light as Flora approached, her scales resonating with a similar glow. They exchanged a look of wonder and uncertainty. "We should keep this to ourselves for now," Flora whispered, her bioluminescence flickering with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Lawrence nodded, carefully wrapping the chalice and tucking it away in their luggage. On the day of the transfer, the station buzzed with activity. Lawrence and Flora boarded the shuttle, their hands clasped tightly together. As the airlock sealed behind them, neither noticed the group of maintenance workers eyeing them with barely concealed hostility. Captain Ethan Hayes, monitoring the security feeds, frowned as he noticed suspicious movements in the environmental control sector. His instincts, honed by years of service, screamed danger. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the station. Sections of the station began to depressurize rapidly, creating chaos and panic. "It's a deliberate sabotage," Hayes shouted into his communicator, racing towards the shuttle bay. "We need to get Lawrence and Flora out of here now." As Hayes sprinted through the corridors, he caught sight of the disguised Iconian extremists attempting to breach the shuttle bay doors. Without hesitation, he drew his weapon and engaged them in a fierce firefight. "Go! Launch now!" Hayes yelled into his comm as he ducked behind a bulkhead, laser fire sizzling past his head. The shuttle's engines roared to life, drowning out the sounds of battle. As it lifted off, a stray shot hit the station's communication array, severing their link to Earth. Inside the shuttle, Lawrence and Flora clutched each other tightly as they hurtled away from the station and towards Earth. The luminous chalice hidden in their luggage began to pulse with an otherworldly energy, unnoticed amidst the chaos of their escape. As they entered Earth's atmosphere, both Lawrence and Flora gasped, overwhelmed by a sudden rush of shared sensations. Their newly altered physiologies reacted to the planet's environment in ways neither of them could have anticipated. The shuttle touched down at a secure facility where a team of human and Iconian scientists waited anxiously. As the airlock hissed open, Lawrence and Flora stepped out hand in hand, blinking in the bright sunlight of their new home. Behind them, the shuttle's communication system crackled with static, a faint echo of the ongoing battle on the space station. The couple turned to face the assembled scientists, unaware of the full extent of the danger they had narrowly escaped, or the challenges that still lay ahead. As they stepped off the shuttle, the bright sunlight momentarily blinded them, a stark contrast to the artificial lighting of the space station. "Welcome to Earth," Dr. Voss greeted them, her voice barely audible over the whir of machinery and bustling activity. "We've prepared a special facility for you and the other volunteers." Lawrence and Flora followed her through a series of security checkpoints, their hands intertwined. The sprawling complex stretched out before them, a mix of sleek laboratories and comfortable living quarters. "This will be your new home," Dr. Voss explained, leading them to a spacious apartment. "We've designed it to accommodate both human and Iconian needs." As they settled in, Lawrence couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He caught glimpses of uniformed guards patrolling the perimeter, their expressions taut with vigilance. Over the next few days, they met other human Iconian pairs who had volunteered for the program. Each couple shared their own unique story of connection and change, but none seemed to have experienced the profound physiological shifts that Lawrence and Flora had undergone. Dr. Voss wasted no time in resuming her research. The new facility boasted cutting-edge equipment that made their previous setup look primitive by comparison. We're going to run a series of tests to track the changes in your bodies, she explained as she attached sensors to Lawrence's skin. The results we've seen so far are unprecedented. Lawrence winced as a needle pierced his skin, drawing blood for analysis. How unprecedented are we talking about, Doc? Dr. Voss's eyes gleamed with excitement. Your DNA is continuing to incorporate Iconian genetic markers at an accelerating rate. And Flora, your bioluminescent patterns are evolving into forms we've never seen before. Flora's scales pulsed with a mix of anxiety and curiosity. Is it dangerous? We don't believe so, Dr. Voss assured her, but we need to monitor these changes closely. As the days passed, Lawrence and Flora found moments of privacy to examine the luminous chalice. In the quiet of their room, they placed their hands on its smooth surface, gasping as a warm glow enveloped them. Can you feel that? Lawrence whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. Flora nodded, her scales shimmering with excitement. It's like I can sense your heartbeat, your emotions. They began conducting their own secret experiments with the artifact, discovering that it enhanced their ability to communicate without words, to share sensations and memories. Outside the facility, tensions were rising. Senator Victor Hawthorne's voice boomed from news broadcasts, his rhetoric growing increasingly inflammatory. We cannot allow this aberration to continue, he shouted to a cheering crowd. The very essence of humanity is at stake. President Eliza Frost appeared on screens across the facility, her face etched with concern. In light of recent protests, we're increasing security measures at all research sites. Your safety is our top priority. True to her word, a new team of guards arrived, led by a familiar face, Captain Ethan Hayes. As he strode through the facility, his sharp eyes seemed to linger on Lawrence and Flora. Just here to keep you folks safe, he said with a nod, but Lawrence couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Hayes's presence than mere security. As the research continued, Lawrence and Flora's bodies underwent further changes. One morning, Lawrence awoke to find faint, iridescent patterns tracing across his skin. Flora, look at this, he said, holding out his arm. Her multifaceted eyes widened. It's like you're developing bioluminescence. They reported the change to Dr. Voss, who immediately called for a full examination. As Lawrence lay under a scanner, he overheard snippets of excited conversation among the scientists. Coevolution, adapting to each other's physiology. Implications are staggering. The news of their accelerated changes spread through the facility like wildfire. Other couples approached them, seeking advice and reassurance. How did it start for you? A nervous-looking human asked. Does it hurt? His Iconian partner chimed in. Scales flickering with anxiety, Lawrence and Flora found themselves becoming de facto leaders among the volunteers, sharing their experiences and offering support. Their unique bond served as a beacon of hope for the others, a living example of what was possible. As the days wore on, strange occurrences began to plague the facility. Equipment malfunctioned, data disappeared, and security systems glitched unpredictably. Another power fluctuation in Sector 7, a technician reported, frustration evident in his voice. Captain Hayes frowned, his hand resting on his weapon. These aren't random failures. Someone's trying to sabotage us. Lawrence and Flora exchanged a worried glance. The luminous chalice, hidden in their quarters, had been pulsing with increased frequency, as if warning them of impending danger. That night, as they lay in bed, a sudden chill ran through both of them. Lawrence sat up, his newly developed bioluminescent patterns glowing faintly in the dark. Flora, did you feel that? She nodded, her scales rippling with unease. Something's wrong. We need to tell Dr. Voss about the chalice. Lawrence hesitated, then nodded. You're right, whatever's coming, we'll need all the help we can get. As they made their way to Dr. Voss's office, alarms began to blare throughout the facility. The lights flickered, plunging the corridors into momentary darkness. In that instant, Lawrence caught a glimpse of unfamiliar figures, moving swiftly through the shadows. Intruders, he whispered to Flora, pulling her close. They quickened their pace, hearts racing in unison. The secret of the luminous chalice burdened immensely on their minds as they navigated the chaos erupting around them. Whatever power the artifact held, they knew it might be their only hope in facing the storm that was about to break over the facility. As they rounded a corner, they nearly collided with Dr. Voss, her face etched with concern. "Lawrence, Flora, thank goodness you're safe," she exclaimed, ushering them into her office. "We need to talk." Once inside, Lawrence pulled the luminous chalice from his bag. "Dr. Voss, we have something to show you." The artifact pulsed with an otherworldly light as he placed it on her desk. Dr. Voss's eyes widened, her scientific curiosity overriding her shock. This is extraordinary," she breathed, reaching out to touch it. As her fingers made contact, the chalice's glow intensified. "Where did you find this?" Before they could answer, Captain Hayes burst into the office, his weapon drawn. "We've got intruders in the facility. You need to come with me now." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Lawrence and Flora found themselves whisked away to a secure wing of the facility, surrounded by armed guards. Through the reinforced windows, they could see teams of security personnel sweeping the grounds, led by Captain Hayes. Dr. Voss worked tirelessly, analyzing the luminous chalice. Her eyes grew wider with each new discovery. "The energy signature. It matches the anomalous readings we've been getting from your physiological scans," she explained, her voice filled with excitement. "This artifact may be the key to understanding your unique coevolution." As Lawrence and Flora sat in their new quarters, they could feel the tension in the air. Alarms sounded intermittently, and the sounds of hurried footsteps echoed through the corridors. Suddenly, a violent coughing, fit from the room next door, caught their attention. They rushed to investigate, finding one of the other human Iconian couples doubled over in pain. "Help!" the human partner gasped, his skin pale and clammy. "Something's wrong." Within hours, similar reports flooded in from across the facility. Dr. Voss, her face drawn with worry, explained the situation. "It's a virus engineered to target the altered physiology of human Iconian pairs. We're doing everything we can to contain it, but it's spreading rapidly through the air circulation system." As panic began to set in, Lawrence and Flora noticed something strange. While others around them fell ill, they remained unaffected. Dr. Voss, upon realizing their immunity, immediately isolated them in a specialized medical lab. "Your advanced physiological changes seem to have granted you natural resistance," she explained, preparing a battery of tests. "We need to study this. You might be our best hope for developing an antidote." Lawrence and Flora exchanged a look, their newly developed bioluminescent patterns pulsing in unison. Without hesitation, they agreed to undergo a series of experimental procedures. The process was grueling. Hours turned into days as Dr. Voss and her team worked tirelessly to synthesize a cure from their blood. Lawrence winced as yet another needle pierced his skin, but the discomfort was nothing compared to the screams and coughs echoing from the quarantine wards. As they lay side by side in the lab, connected to a dizzying array of medical equipment, Lawrence and Flora found their bond deepening even further. The intimacy of their shared experience, combined with their evolving physiology, allowed them to communicate without words. "I can feel your heartbeat," Flora whispered, her scales shimmering with a new, more intense bioluminescence. "It's like we're becoming one." Lawrence nodded, noticing the intricate patterns now covering his entire body. "And I can breathe more easily than ever before," he realized, marveling at how his lungs had adapted to process Earth's atmosphere more efficiently. Their moment of wonder was interrupted by a commotion outside the lab. Captain Hayes's voice boomed through the corridor. "Intruders in Sector 4! All personnel! Battle stations!" The sounds of laser fire and breaking glass filled the air. Dr. Voss rushed into the lab, her face pale. "We're under attack. The extremists who released the virus, they're trying to reach you." As alarms blared and the battle raged outside, Lawrence and Flora focused on completing the antidote synthesis. The luminous chalice, placed nearby at Dr. Voss's insistence, began to pulse with increasing intensity. "Look!" Dr. Voss exclaimed, pointing to her monitors. "The chalice. It's stabilizing the conditions of the infected couples. This artifact might be more than just a catalyst for your changes. It could be the key to controlled human Iconian integration." Just as hope began to rise, the lab door burst open. Zara, the leader of the extremist group, stood in the doorway, her weapon trained on Dr. Voss. "Step away from them," she snarled. "This abomination ends now." Captain Hayes appeared behind her, his own weapon raised. "Drop it, Zara. It's over." In that moment of standoff, Lawrence and Flora locked eyes. They could feel the luminous chalice calling to them, offering a solution, but at a tremendous cost. "We can save everyone," Lawrence said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we'll have to become something entirely new," Flora finished, understanding immediately. As the chaos swirled around them, Lawrence and Flora faced the most important decision of their lives. To activate the antidote's full potential and pave the way for true human-Iconian integration, they would have to sacrifice their individual identities, merging into a single, unprecedented being. The sound of a shot rang out, and time seemed to slow. Lawrence and Flora reached for each other, their fingers intertwining as they stretched their other hands towards the pulsing, luminous chalice. The artifact's glow enveloped them, growing brighter and brighter until it filled the entire room. In that blinding light, on the precipice of a transformation that would change the course of two species, Lawrence and Flora made their choice. Choice. With a shared breath, they pressed their palms against the smooth surface of the luminous chalice. The artifact's glow intensified, enveloping them in a cocoon of radiant energy. Dr. Voss's eyes widened as she witnessed the transformation beginning. "Quickly," she ordered her team, "prepare the chamber." As Lawrence and Flora were ushered into a specially designed containment unit, alarms blared throughout the facility. Captain Hayes' voice crackled over the intercom. "Intruders have breached the outer perimeter. All personnel, initiate lockdown procedures." Inside the chamber, Lawrence and Flora lay side by side, their bodies beginning to shimmer with an otherworldly light. The luminous chalice pulsed between them, its energy synchronizing with their rapidly changing physiology. "Their cellular structures are merging," Dr. Voss announced, her voice a mix of awe and scientific fascination. She watched the monitors intently, adjusting parameters as the merger progressed. Outside the lab, the sounds of battle grew closer. Laser fire echoed through the corridors, punctuated by shouts and the crash of breaking equipment. Captain Hayes and his team formed a defensive line at the lab's entrance, determined to protect the transformation taking place within. "Hold the line," Hayes commanded, his weapon raised as Zara and her extremists pushed forward. Inside the chamber, Lawrence and Flora's individual forms began to blur, their limbs elongated, skin and scales intermingling in swirling patterns of iridescence. The air crackled with energy as their bodies fused, creating a single hybrid entity. Dr. Voss worked feverishly, collecting samples and analyzing data as fast as her equipment could process it. "The antidote," she muttered, her fingers flying over the controls. "We're so close." A violent tremor shook the facility as the hybrid being's energy interfaced with the building systems. Lights flickered and equipment sputtered. In the momentary darkness, Zara's team seized their opportunity. The lab doors burst open and chaos erupted. Captain Hayes, bleeding from a wound in his side, stood his ground. "You won't stop this," he growled, engaging Zara in close combat. As the fighting raged, the chamber housing Lawrence and Flora's merged form began to glow with an intensity that forced everyone to shield their eyes. The hybrid entity within pulsed with newfound power, its consciousness expanding beyond the confines of its physical form. In a surge of energy, the chamber doors slid open. The being that emerged was neither Lawrence nor Flora, but a perfect synthesis of both. Its skin shimmered with intricate bioluminescent patterns, and its eyes held depths of knowledge and understanding beyond human or Iconian comprehension. Zara, momentarily stunned by the sight, raised her weapon. Before she could fire, the hybrid being extended a hand. A wave of energy rippled through the air, rendering Zara and her team unconscious. "Fascinating," Dr. Voss breathed, approaching the being cautiously. "Can you understand me?" The hybrid nodded, its voice a harmonic blend of Lawrence and Flora's. "We are one, yet we are many. We see the path forward." With fluid grace, the being moved to Dr. Voss's workstation. Its hands danced over the equipment, manipulating energy fields and molecular structures with intuitive ease. Within moments, a synthesized antidote began to flow from the lab's medical fabricators. "Administer this to the infected," the being instructed, its voice resonating with authority. As Dr. Voss and her team rushed to distribute the cure, the hybrid being turned its attention to the facility at large. It closed its eyes, extending its consciousness outward. Through the building's communication systems, its voice reached every corner of the complex and beyond. "People of Earth and Iconia," it began, its words simultaneously broadcast in both human and Iconian languages. "We stand at the threshold of a new era. The barriers between our species have fallen, and with them, the fear and mistrust that have divided us." Outside the facility, the protesters led by Senator Hawthorne fell silent, transfixed by the being's message. On the Iconian homeworld, High Counselor Zenari listened intently, his earlier doubts evaporating in the face of this unprecedented development. As the hybrid being continued its address, Dr. Voss made a startling discovery. "The genetic modifications," she exclaimed, examining the latest test results. "They're not just compatible, they're synergistic. This could revolutionize everything we thought we knew about xenobiology." The being nodded, a smile playing across its features. "The potential for growth and understanding between our species is limitless, but the path forward requires courage, openness, and a willingness to embrace change." As news of the successful antidote spread and tensions began to ease, the hybrid being prepared to face its next challenge. Representatives from Earth and Iconia were en route to the facility, eager to witness this extraordinary development firsthand. The being turned to Dr. Voss and Captain Hayes, its expression serene yet determined. "The real work," it said, "is just beginning." "Beginning," the hybrid being said, its voice resonating with newfound power and purpose. As the words left its lips, a sudden surge of energy emanated from the luminous chalice. The artifact, still pulsing with an otherworldly glow, began to resonate with the hybrid's unique physiology. Dr. Voss's eyes widened as she watched her instrument spike, registering an unprecedented increase in power output. "Containment field at critical levels," she shouted, her fingers flying over the control panel. "We need to stabilize the energy flow." Captain Hayes, still nursing his wound, moved to assist, but the hybrid being raised a hand, stopping him. "No," it said, its voice a harmonious blend of Lawrence and Flora's. "This is meant to happen." The energy from the chalice intensified, creating a feedback loop with the hybrid's body. Arcs of brilliant light danced between the artifact and the being, growing more intense with each passing second. Dr. Voss and her team scrambled to adjust their equipment, but the power quickly overwhelmed the facility's systems. Alarms blared as the energy continued to build. The hybrid being's form began to shimmer and fluctuate, its boundaries blurring as it merged more deeply with the chalice's power. In a blinding flash that forced everyone to shield their eyes, the hybrid and the artifact fused completely. As the light faded and vision returned, those present gasped in awe. Where the hybrid and the chalice had been, a new entity now stood. It resembled both Lawrence and Flora, yet was distinctly its own being. Its skin shimmered with intricate patterns of light, and its eyes held depths of wisdom and power beyond comprehension. The entity spoke, its voice resonating with a new timbre. "I am unity," it declared, "the complete synthesis of human, Iconian, and the ancient energies of the luminous chalice." Dr. Voss approached cautiously, her scientific curiosity overriding her initial shock. "Fascinating," she breathed, reaching for her scanner. "The molecular structure is unlike anything I've ever seen." Unity smiled, then demonstrated its newfound abilities by effortlessly passing through the chamber walls. The assembled officials and scientists let out collective gasps of surprise as Unity reappeared on the other side. "The merger has granted me access to the collective knowledge and experiences of both species," Unity explained, its voice carrying easily through the room. "I also possess the ancient wisdom imbued within the luminous chalice." Captain Hayes, still wary, stepped forward. "And what do you intend to do with this power?" he asked, his hand unconsciously moving to his weapon. Unity's expression softened. "To heal," it said simply. With a gentle touch to the captain's side, the wound that had been troubling him vanished without a trace. As the captain marveled at his healed injury, Unity turned to address the wider audience. "I propose a solution to the ongoing tensions between our species," it announced. "A voluntary program of controlled human Iconian merging, allowing individuals from both races to experience life as a combined being." The room erupted in a mixture of excited murmurs and skeptical whispers. President Frost, who had arrived during the commotion, stepped forward. "While intriguing, this proposal seems extreme," she said carefully. "How can we be sure it's safe or beneficial?" Unity nodded, acknowledging the concern. "Allow me to demonstrate," it said. With a wave of its hand, holographic displays materialized in the air, showing detailed projections of the merger process and its potential benefits. As Unity explained, it simultaneously enhanced the antidote Dr. Voss had developed, granting it the ability to provide immunity against future infections. In a stunning display of power, Unity then terraformed a small, barren island visible through the facility's windows. Within minutes, the island transformed into a lush habitat, suitable for both humans and Iconians. The assembled leaders watched in awe as Unity's actions unfolded. High Counselor Zen Ari, who had arrived with the Iconian delegation, turned to President Frost. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "this is the path forward we've been seeking." President Frost nodded, her expression a mixture of wonder and perseverance. "Unity," she addressed the being, "we would like to hear more about this proposal." As Unity began to outline its plan in greater detail, the atmosphere in the room shifted from skepticism to cautious optimism. The hybrid being that had once been Lawrence and Flora now stood at the precipice of ushering in a new era for both species, its unprecedented powers and knowledge offering a glimpse of a future where the boundaries between human and Iconian might truly dissolve.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.